So now tell me, I think we are on page 365 and we have to read it is the reality.
Yes, Rangadhar, that is where
Yes, correct. Okay. So, okay. So, have we read it or do we have to read it? I don't remember.
we have to read it, Rangadhar.
Okay, then Archanavi, you read it. Let's read the whole
Okay,
passage.
okay, Rangadhar. It is the reality, the self, that takes the position of the conscious being regarding and accepting or ruling the works of its own nature. An apparent duality is created in order that there may be a free action of nature working itself out with the support of the spirit, and again a free and masterful action of the spirit controlling and working out nature. This duality is also necessary that the spirit may be at any time at liberty to draw back from any formation of its nature and dissolve all formation or accept or enforce a new or a higher formation. These are very evident possibilities of the spirit in its dealings with its own force, and they can be observed and verified in our own experience. They are logical results of the powers of the infinite consciousness, powers which we have seen to be native to its infinity. The Purusha aspect and the Prakriti aspect go always together, and whatever status nature or consciousness force in action assumes, manifests, or develops, there is a corresponding status of the spirit. In its supreme status, the spirit is the supreme conscious being, Purushottama, and the consciousness force is his supreme nature, Paraprakriti. In each status of the gradations of nature, the spirit takes a poise of its being proper to that gradation. In mind nature, it becomes the mental being. In life nature, it becomes the vital being. In nature of matter, it becomes the physical being. In supermind, it becomes the being of knowledge. In the supreme spiritual status, it becomes the being of bliss and pure existence. In us, in the embodied individual, it stands behind all as the psychic entity, the inner self supporting the other formations of a consciousness and spiritual existence. The Purusha, individual in us, is cosmic in the cosmos, transcendent in the transcendence. The identity with the self is apparent, but it is the self in its pure, impersonal, personal status of a spirit in things and beings. Impersonal because undifferentiated by personal quality, personal because it presides over the individualizations of self in each individual, which deals with the works of its consciousness force, its executive force of self nature, in whatever poise is necessary for that purpose.
What a magnificent paragraph, so clear everything, but we have to go and see the implications of each word. So we'll go into detail and I'm sure you will get a very clear picture of this chapter, Brahman Purusha Ishwar. Just to give you the background again, I'm repeating. Brahman is the first realization when you make your mind silent and go to the self, you realize the self. And it is also called Brahman or it can also be called the Atman. Okay? And this is the impersonal aspect of your own consciousness. It becomes impersonal. There are no personalities and there are no features. That is why it is featureless. Okay, without any characteristics, without any specific color, form, shape, or anything like that. Okay, number one. Then you go to the other level, it is not necessarily a rising, but it can also be seen as a rising into the next level, or even at the lower level, you can get glimpses of the higher planes of consciousness. The next is Purusha, and Sri Aurobindo uses the word Purusha or conscious being. When he uses the conscious being, it is very clearly the personal aspect. There is a being which is conscious of itself. Okay, so it's a Purusha. But this Purusha is not limited only to its personality aspect. That's what I will explain to you. Okay, so now, so it is the reality, the self, that takes the position of the conscious being. The self is impersonal, but it becomes personal. That's what he's saying. It is the reality, the self, that takes the position of the conscious being, and the conscious being is the Purusha. And when the Purusha is there, it does three things: regarding, accepting, ruling. Now, each word you see, when it is regarding, it is looking. Therefore, it's a witness only. No action at all. No action. It is only looking. Okay. Witness, sakshi. Then it is accepting. And when it is accepting, it is realizing that the body mind life is his own. And he becomes the Anumanta. So accepting corresponds to Anumanta. Okay. That's a Purusha aspect. But it can also be ruling. Ruling means you are king and you are ruling over your kingdom of the body, mind, life, and even the universe. So then you become the Ishvara or the Purushottama. So look at the words. Each word, one word same they are using, but there is a whole meaning behind each one. So I'm just opening that little comment which I made here. Regarding corresponds to witness. Okay, that's the lowest level of the spiritual planes of consciousness. As I told you, spiritual planes of consciousness, second level, and it corresponds to the higher mind, intuitive mind, illumined mind, intuitive mind, over mind. There you can experience the witness. You have become a conscious being and you are witnessing everything. You are witnessing your own being as well as the being in the physical world. Your own body, mind, life is part of the physical world. But then accepting. Accepting means Anumanta, Jnata, Bharta, Bhokta. Okay? You are accepting. And you are accepting that the body, mind, life is your own. There is a connection. Okay? And the last one, ruling, is a Ishvara, or in Gita's words, Purushottama. So three levels. Okay? In three words, he has given you a whole philosophy. Okay? Now, I go back to the text. Okay, so regarding, accepting, and ruling, or ruling, and the works of its own nature. Which are the works of its own nature? Your thoughts, your emotions, and your physical actions. That's your own nature. Your own nature is your body, mind, life. But you can also interpret this as not only individual, but also at a cosmic level. The conscious being, which is cosmic, he will tell you that later on, is looking after its own nature in the universe, universal nature. So this sentence you can apply individually as well as in a universal sense. Now, an apparent duality is created in order that there may be free action of nature. Why should you have only a conscious being which is limited? When you speak of a conscious being, a Purusha, who is a personal aspect, the personal aspect means you have features. Okay? You have an individual has got features, but this can also become impersonal. Therefore, an apparent duality is created. Duality of what? Consciousness and force, self and reality, the self and the world, okay? Or Purusha Prakriti. This is the duality that he's talking about. Your soul and your own body, mind, life. That's a duality. An apparent duality is created in order that there may be a free action of nature working itself out with the support of the spirit. Now, this is an interesting thing you see. If the conscious being is has got personal features, it is limited. So the duality is apparent. The conscious being can also become the self. That's what he's telling you. It is not limited only to its conscious being. There is a plasticity. So, very clear? Otherwise, he will not be able to act freely on his own nature. It's limited. Personality always implies limitation. Okay? Universality and impersonality implies total freedom from all features. Okay? So, an apparent duality is created in order that there may be a free action of nature working itself out with the support of the spirit, and again a free and masterful action of the spirit controlling and working out nature. So, clear? It can do this at three levels. It can either regard or it can start acting freely in the physical world, or it can become the master of the universe. Okay, master collection of spirit. Here also in this sentence also, three levels are very clearly mentioned. Okay? This duality of Purusha and Prakriti, okay, or Chit and Shakti. This duality is also necessary, that the spirit may be at any time at liberty to draw back from any formation of its nature and dissolve all formation, or accept or enforce a new and higher formation. You need not be limited to only one level of consciousness. At present, we are identified with our body, mind, life. We are in the lowest level of our consciousness. But it's not that it's permanent. It is not permanent. You can rise to the higher mind. There also it is not permanent. You can rise to the eleventh mind. There also it's not permanent. You can go to the lower mind. Even there is no permanent status. You can rise into this world. That's what Shraddha is mentioning. It can dissolve all formation. When it is in the lower, it dissolve all formations, it loses its features and becomes impersonal. So the more it rises, it becomes more and more impersonal without losing its personality. That's the funny part, okay? At our level, it's not possible, but at that divine level, it is possible. So I read that sentence again. This duality is also necessary, that the spirit, now spirit is usually the impersonal aspect, okay, the transcendent, may be at any time at liberty to draw back from any formation. In its nature, he explains it, okay? It can station itself on any plane. That's what he's meaning. It can draw back from any formation of its nature. Formation of its nature, the features in nature, the many, okay? The many are all features. And dissolve all formation, or accept or enforce a new or a higher formation. You can go to a higher level of consciousness and change the lower also. That's what Swami is saying. I gave you an example of how he had a red eye and he went to the higher level of consciousness, and there he had the power to even change that formation of the red eye, okay? Dissolve all formation, or accept or enforce a new and higher formation. These are evident, very evident possibilities of the spirit in its dealing with its own force. The spirit is Purusha, dealing with its own force, Prakriti. And they can be observed and verified in one's own experience. So what he's saying is, when you can go even into the spiritual planes of consciousness, a certain power starts becoming apparent to you. In the beginning, you don't see the connection, but in the second level, accepting Anumanta, Bhokta, Bharta, okay, Jnata, you start seeing that you have a power over the lower. The power is not complete. It's complete only at the third level, but still you can do. That's exactly what Sri did with his own, that red eye that I spoke of, that interesting example. Okay, now these are very evident possibilities of the spirit in his dealing with his own force, and they can be observed and verified in one's own experience, in our own experience. They are logical results of the powers of the infinite consciousness, powers which we have seen to be native to its infinity. Native to its infinity, power of consciousness, power of Shakti, power of Ananda, and power of the Sat also, truth. Okay, so whatever the Purusha aspect and the Prakriti aspect go always together. They are always together, but in different proportions. Only at the highest level, they are equal to each other. All below, they go on separating, and at the lowest level, they become absolutely separate from each other. Like in the matter, consciousness does not seem to be there at all. It becomes zero, and force is there fully, 100%. As I told you, it's not 100%, but it is 99.9999% because consciousness is there. Okay, and consciousness is also in matter 0.0001%. Why I'm saying that? Because it is latent. Okay? It's not absolute. So the Purusha aspect and the Prakriti aspect go always together, and whatever status nature or consciousness force in action assumes, manifests or develops, there is a corresponding status of the spirit. In other words, each plane of consciousness, okay, there is a combination of Purusha and Prakriti. The higher you rise, the Purusha becomes more prominent and Prakriti starts becoming less. But it's the opposite in the highest level. Consciousness is total. Transcendence is consciousness, and Shakti becomes its own power. Okay. So the Purusha aspect always go together, and whatever status nature or consciousness force in action assumes, manifests or develops, it need not, it can only assume, it need not act. But it can also manifest its power, or it can even develop. There is a corresponding status of the spirit. In other words, the relation between Purusha and Prakriti, he says, very interesting. Okay. Okay, I'll expand a little on the idea. In matter, very roughly speaking, force is 100%, okay, and consciousness is 0. Come to life, consciousness starts coming, okay, even the worm becomes conscious of its surroundings in a very limited way. So you can say 10%, don't take me too seriously, 10% consciousness, 90% Shakti. Then you come to the mental level, okay, maybe 40-50% consciousness and 50% Shakti. Go to the higher mind, consciousness 90-80%, okay, maybe even 100% in a way of speaking, and Shakti becomes 0. And as you keep going higher and higher, they start combining together, and at the highest level they become equal to each other. Okay, so this is how you have to see it. Okay, so that's what he's saying. The Purusha aspect and the Prakriti aspect go always together, and whatever status, and he defines in a very interesting way. He says each plane of consciousness can be defined by the proportion of the importance of Purusha and Prakriti to each other. That's why I use the words 0%, 100%, okay, 10%, 90%. It's a very graphic way of explaining what he's saying, because I'm using very gross terms, but it becomes easy to understand. Okay. At the highest level, 50%, 50%. Each one is equal to the other. Okay? In its supreme status, the spirit is the supreme conscious being, Purushottama. So, at the highest level in the supermind, spirit, Purusha, Prakriti, Purusha, is the supreme conscious being, Purushottama, individual aspect. And the consciousness force is the supreme nature, Paraprakriti. So, at the highest level, the Prakriti, which seems to be mechanical energy, turns out to be his own Shakti. Okay? It's his own force. It is not something separate. It becomes his own force. A relation is very clearly visible in the highest level. Srimad is using the word Purushottama, but we can also use the word Ishvara, which Srimad uses very often. Okay? In fact, that's the chapter, na? He uses the word Brahman, Purusha, Ishvara. Here he is using the word Purushottama, which is used in the Gita. Purusha Uttama. The conscious force is a supreme nature, Paraprakriti. Note, and interestingly, Paraprakriti, the highest Prakriti at the higher level, conscious force. But at the lowest level, Aparaprakriti, unconscious mechanical force. In each status of the gradations of nature, we spoke about the gradations of nature. No? Each plane of consciousness, there is a proportion between Prakriti and Purusha. The spirit takes a poise of its being proper to that gradation. So, proper to that gradation. In matter, the gradation is, force is 100%. Therefore, the spirit adjusts itself and becomes 0. Okay, it takes a poise of that. In life, it takes a poise of 10%, and the Shakti is 90%. You get the basic idea, na? So, in mind nature, it becomes the mental being, which means, as I said, 40, 60, 40% consciousness, 60% Prakriti, mechanical nature. I say that because we are still prisoners at the mind level. We are not conscious at all. We are not fully free. But the freedom comes in the higher plane, in the higher mind. There it becomes, the consciousness becomes more important than the Shakti. Okay? So, I continue. So, In life nature, it becomes the vital being. In nature of matter, it becomes the physical being. In supermind, it becomes the being of knowledge. In other words, spirit, God or Satchidananda has the capacity to take any poise it wants willingly. It effaces its own features in the lower level and it goes on slowly changing its position. It is very flexible. There is no compulsion on it. Okay. Although at our level, we do feel that we are compulsorily prisoners of our body, mind, life, but that's not true. We have the choice. Okay. So it becomes the vital being in nature. So what he is describing here is the Purusha when it enters the mind level. There are two. There is an outer mind, which is your normal mental capacity, but there is an inner mind, and that is the Purusha. The inner mind is the inner Purusha. Okay. So because it's the inner mind, or sometimes you use the word also true mind, because the mental capacities are available to it fully. Then when it becomes the vital being, it is the pranamaya Purusha. It becomes the physical, the vital force. It actually is a personality which corresponds to that. Then at the lower level, you have the subtle physical. That also is a Purusha, the Annamaya Purusha. Okay? So these are what the spirit can do. It has the power to limit itself to any of these planes of consciousness. So Rebbe is not using the word limitation because that's a negative word. He's saying it takes a poise. It's a way of speaking. It takes a poise according to each level it wants. Okay? So then I go to the next sentence, phrase. In the supreme spiritual status, it becomes the being of bliss and pure existence. Being is Sat, bliss is Ananda, and pure existence, okay? The existence also is Sat, Sat, Chit, Shakti, Ananda. He is not using the word Shakti here because he is talking of the being of knowledge. Okay? In us, that means in the lower level, in the embodied individual, it stands behind all as the psychic entity. The spirit does not disappear. Even at our level, it is standing behind all. It is standing behind the inner mind, inner vital, inner physical, deep inside the intraconscious. The inner self supporting the other formulations of our consciousness and spiritual existence. The psychic being supports the inner mind, inner vital and inner physical. It supports. It supports also the outer mind, outer life and outer body, but the influence is not felt so strongly. It's only when the psychic being comes forward that the body, mind, life becomes conscious of its presence. But that is rare, it's not common. The Purusha, individual in us. Note the word, when you use the word Purusha, conscious being, it's always the individual. And individual means the personal aspect, limitations. Okay? Is cosmic in the cosmos, transcendent in the transcendence. Okay? So note that. Although it is limited, it becomes impersonal in the cosmos and it goes outside the cosmos and its personality in the transcendent. It is not limited permanently to any one status. It can freely change itself. Okay. This is very interesting because we can't think of that. But that's exactly what the spirit can do. Bahurupi. Okay, it can change any form it wants. The Purusha individual in us is stressing. Although it is individual, it can become cosmic. It can become the impersonal. It can become even beyond personality and impersonality, transcendent in the transcendence. The identity with the self is apparent. Okay, the identity with the self is the impersonal aspect. But it is the self in its pure impersonal, personal status of a spirit in things and beings. Impersonal because undifferentiated by personal quality. Personal because it presides over the individualizations of self in each individual, which deals with the works of its consciousness force, its executive force of self-nature, in whatever poise is necessary to that purpose. This paragraph is very clearly stating that although Brahman, Purusha, Ishvara seem to be different formulations like ice, water, water vapor, someone who doesn't know will say, Arey, these are all three different things, but they are not different. They are essentially the same, and it has the power to mold itself to any of these forms. That's what he's saying. Very clear. Okay? So, being, okay, just for the fun of it, I am reading out the, 1 second. I am reading out the summary of what he's saying here. The Purusha is nothing but the immutable reality, the self that only witnesses or accepts passively or rules and masters the actions of its own nature, Prakriti. When it is witnessed, it becomes the self, Brahman. When it accepts, it is the Purusha. When it rules and governs, it becomes a Lord, Ishvara, Purushottama. The duality of Purusha and Prakriti is created in order to let Purusha have total freedom from the clutches of Prakriti. This is a double action. First, nature freely creates by itself with Purusha's passive support. Secondly, Purusha, completely free, independent, creates innumerably, freely through his own force. This arrangement allows spirit to transcend its own creation or create anew whatever it wants to through nature. Therefore, consciousness and force are always together in many relations on many planes, each plane defining a particular relation between the two. Thus, in the highest level, Prakriti is Purusha's own power in matter. Prakriti is supreme and Purusha is involved, hidden in the works of Prakriti. On each plane, Purusha takes a stance corresponding to that level. On the mind plane, Purusha becomes the mental being. In life, it becomes the vital being. In matter, it becomes the physical being. In man, spirit becomes the psychic being, standing behind body like mind. Purusha is concomitantly personal and impersonal, even though individual in man. In the Supreme, there is consciousness and force. Each is equal to the other. None is supreme over the other. What can therefore the relation of be the two? They can only be equal to each other and they can be superior to the other and they can also be all the combinations in between. That's what he's saying. Okay? So now we can, I think, go to the next para. We have got enough time. We got nearly 20 minutes. But it is evident.
Shall I read?
Yes, do that.
But it is evident that whatever the posture taken or relation formed in any individual nodus of Purusha Prakriti, the being is in a fundamental cosmic relation Lord or ruler of its nature. For even when it allows nature to have its own way with it, its consent is necessary to support her workings. This comes out in its fullest revelation in the third aspect of the reality, the divine being, who is the master and creator of the universe. Here, the Supreme Person, the being, in its transcendental and cosmic consciousness and force, comes to the front, omnipotent, omniscient, the controller of all energies, the conscious in all, that is conscient or inconscient, the inhabitant of all souls and minds and hearts and bodies, the ruler or overruler of all works, the enjoyer of all delight, the creator who has built all things in his own being, the all person of whom all beings are personalities, the power from whom are all powers, the self, the spirit in all, by his being the father of by his being the father of all that is, in his consciousness force, the divine mother, the friend of all creatures, the all blissful and all beautiful of whom beauty and joy are the revelation, the all beloved and all lover. In a certain sense, so seen and understood, this becomes the most comprehensive of the aspects of the reality, since here all are united in a single formulation. For the Ishvara is the supracosmic as well as intracosmic. He is that which exists and inhabits and supports all individuality. He is the supreme and universal Brahman, the absolute, the supreme self, the supreme Purusha. But very clearly, this is not the personal God of popular religions, a being limited by his qualities, individual and separate from all others. For all such personal gods are only limited representations or names and divine personalities of the one Ishvara. Neither is this Saguna Brahman active and possessed of qualities, for that is only one side of the being of the Ishvara. The Nirguna, immobile and without qualities, is another aspect of his existence. Ishvara is Brahman, the reality, self, spirit, revealed as possessor, enjoyer of his own self-existence, creator of the universe, and one with it, pantheist and yet superior to it, the, the eternal, the infinite, the ineffable, the divine transcendence.
So I'm expanding further on the idea that he has already given us. You can quickly go through what he's saying. There is a great flexibility. Our mind always makes very clear distinctions, and that is necessary for us to understand. But because if you don't make distinctions, your thinking will be very, very confused and mixed. So we have to have very clear logic and very clear understanding. Therefore, the logic has to develop in human beings. But when you go to the higher level of consciousness, leave the field of the mind, naturally the mind mental laws don't operate. There is no logic there. Okay. It can become liquid, solid, vapor. Okay. There is no, you have to understand, it becomes the logic of the infinite. That's what he is explaining in this paragraph. But it is evident that whatever the posture taken or relation formed in the individual nodus of Purusha Prakriti, each plane of consciousness is a nodus and knot. And that knot is Purusha Prakriti, and on each plane, the proportion of Purusha and Prakriti is changing. That's what he's saying. Individual nodus of each Purusha Prakriti. The being is in a fundamental cosmic relation, Lord and ruler of its nature. Is in a fundamental cosmic relation, Lord and ruler of its nature. For even when it allows nature to have its own way with it, its consent is necessary to support the workings. In other words, he's saying, even if the Purusha takes a poise of limitation at the other planes, it never loses its totality, it never loses its third status of power. It is always there behind. It's like wearing different clothes. You remain the same, and on different days and for different purposes, you use different clothes. Or nowadays, the expression is wear a different hat. Sometimes you are the judge, okay? Then you have to wear that black coat, and you have to wear that thing on top. Then, when you are at home, you change your clothes. Your function has changed. So it's like that. That's what he's saying. Okay? So its consent is it. This comes out in its fullest revelation in the third aspect of the reality. Now note the word very clearly, third. That is the reason why I go on saying there are three levels. Okay? Level 1, we are identified with our body, mind, life. We are in ignorance. We don't know our own being. We don't know our own self. Level 1. Level 2, the self, the nirvana consciousness, the silent mind, self, and but that self also has got gradations. Higher mind, element mind, intuitive mind, ever mind. And you can become the witness, you can also become the Anuvanta, Dharta, Bhokta, Sakshi. And at the highest level, you become the Uttama Purusha. You become the Ishvara. Okay? That's what is explained. So the third, I'm stressing the word third. Very clearly is giving you the three levels. This comes out in its fullest revelation, the third aspect of the reality, the divine being who is the master and creator of the universe. Even when he takes a poise in the lower levels, he is always master, but he is not exercising his mastery and power. He does it through the Prakriti. Prakriti becomes more and more dominant, and he is using Prakriti for doing the work, but he himself remains behind. This comes out in fullest revelation of third reality. Here, the Supreme Person, the being with the B cap, you can also talk about in the Ishvara or the Purushottama. Supreme Person is almost translating Purusha Uttama. Okay, Uttama, Supreme, Purusha, Person. So it's almost a translation of Purushottama. The being in its transcendental and cosmic consciousness and force comes to the front. The being in the transcendental and cosmic consciousness and force comes to the front. Supreme Person comes to the front at the third level. Omnipotent, omniscient, the controller of all energies, fully mastered, the conscious in all that is conscient or inconscient. So even at the lower level, the Purushottama is there. That's what Sridhar is saying. And even at the lowest level, the divine presence is there. The ruler or overruler of all works. Now that's interesting. Why is he saying you can ruler or overruler of all works? He has the power to completely overrule. And that's a very interesting thing because the divine grace, okay, can actually in yoga, the divine grace cancels its own laws and helps you. So that's why overrule, okay. The ruler or overruler of all works, the enjoyer of all delight, the enjoyer, the creator who has built all things in his own being, the divine, the universe is not something outside his being, it is in his own being. The all person, the Ishvara, who contains all beings in himself, of whom all beings have personalities, the power from whom all powers, the self and spirit in all, by his being the father of all that is, in his conscious force, the divine mother, friend of all creatures. When you experience the divine, personal aspect of the divine, that's what happens. In synthesis, very clearly says the divine can be father, mother, friend, okay, relation of parent and child. It can be friend. It can be anything you want. Okay, you can experience the divine as anything you want in his own being, the all person, etc., etc. By his being or in his conscious force, the divine mother, friend of all creatures, the all blissful and all beautiful, of whom beauty and joy are the revelation, the all beloved. By the way, Sunki, in English you can say beloved. In some places you pronounce the ed. Okay, you don't need. Yes, all beloved, you said, but you can say also beloved. In some cases it is allowed. The all lover. In a certain sense, so seen and understood, this becomes the most comprehensive of the aspects of the reality. In a sense, why is he saying that? At the highest level, you see the personal aspect and the impersonal aspect and all that. But he's saying this becomes the most comprehensive of all the aspects. But why is he saying in a certain sense? Because it can, if it wants, remove that comprehensiveness and become very limited. That's why, in a sense, okay. So understood, this becomes the most comprehensive overall aspects of the reality, since here all are united in a single formulation. For the Ishvara is supracosmic as well as intracosmic. He is there in the cosmos as well as above the cosmos. Supracosmic, above the cosmos. Intracosmic, in the cosmos. He is that which exceeds and inhabits and supports all individuality. He is supreme and universal Brahman, the absolute, the supreme self, the supreme Purusha. Now, I have a note on Purusha. Just 1 second. Purushottama of the Gita. Now, there's something interesting. When he's saying, when you realize the Purushottama aspect, you can experience the divine as your father, you can experience the divine as your mother, you can experience him as your friend, your guide, your master. All these things are possible. But there is one relation with the divine which is quite rare. Okay, and that's very interesting. That's why I'm mentioning to you. You see the divine as your own child. Normally it's the other way around. But even this is there, and there is a very beautiful incident in Ramakrishna's life. Okay, I think I've spoken to you about it once. There's an old lady, and she was a lover of Krishna, and she used to worship Bala Krishna, Krishna in his childhood. Okay? And Krishna came to her and expressed himself as a child. And he used to go to her. She was very poor. Okay. She is known as Gopala Ma because that was the experience she had. And this experience for her lasted for 6 months. After that, it disappeared and completely made her miserable. So Ramakrishna had to console her and tell her that to experience the divine all the time in our lower being is not possible. So it comes and disappears. But don't worry about it. So this is what she experienced. This Balakrishna used to come and pester her, give me something to eat. And she was very poor. So she used to give him the most ordinary food that she used to have. You know, in India we have puffed rice and we have parched rice. Okay, chide and moody in Bengali. So these, and she had only that, and she used to give him, and he used to enjoy that. He used to eat that, and when she used to go to Ramakrishna, which was some distance away, she used to carry Balakrishna in her hands. And something extremely interesting happened when she went and met Ramakrishna. Ramakrishna could see that she is carrying Balakrishna, subtle body in her own. So what he did, he identified himself with Balakrishna. And in the physical world, how does that translate? He went and sat in her lap. So others who are looking on say, what is this fool doing? He is sitting in the lap of an old woman. But this is what happened. He identified himself with Balakrishna. So I mentioned this because all the relations are there, but normally this relation of the seeing the divine as your own child is very rare. I have come across this only in this one incident. Gopal Ma, she is called. Okay, so you can experience it as any relation you want. Okay, so this is what Shelby is saying in this paragraph. But very clearly, I am continuing from Purusha. But very clearly, there were 4 minutes. I'll finish the paragraph. But very clearly, this is not the personal God of popular religions. In popular religions, you think of Shiva, Vishnu, Brahma, or Durga, or Lakshmi. This is not the Ishvara consciousness, the Purushottama consciousness is not this aspect. It is both and far superior to that. Okay? All these divine limited personalities, I'm just saying, the personal gods are inventions of the mind, okay, are only limited representations of names and divine personalities of the one Purusha. Neither is this the Saguna Brahman, active and possessed of qualities. The Saguna Brahman is the featured, the Brahman with features, active and possessed of qualities, but that is only one side of the being of the Ishvara. The Nirguna, immobile and without qualities, is the other aspect of his existence. Ishvara is Brahman, the reality, the self, spirit, revealed as possessor, enjoyer of his own self-existence, creator of the universe, and one with it, Pantheos, the universe, and yet superior to it, the eternal, the infinite, the ineffable, divine transcendence. So when we are speaking of Brahman, Purusha, Ishvara, don't make an absolute division between them which is permanent. They are all flexible and they can merge one into the other. It's the same thing taking different voices. That's what he's saying. Okay? So we did 2 paras and very clearly said they're expressing the relations and the statuses of Brahman, Purusha, Ishvara. Okay? Brahman, the impersonal aspect. And when you are in the Brahman consciousness, Purusha becomes illusion maker. You see the physical world as illusion. Then when you go to the next level, the Purusha aspect, the conscious being, you are conscious and you see the physical world as unconscious energy. It's not an illusion anymore. You see it as unconscious energy. It is real, but it is no consciousness energy. Like a river flowing, the sunlight coming, okay, it's all, or wind blowing, it is impersonal. When you go to the third level, the Ishvara start seeing the mechanical energy now as conscious energy. It is your own energy taking different voices. This is the gist of what he's saying in the whole para. So, shall we stop here today? Archana ji has already made, okay, the sharp opposition, we have to start from there next time. Okay. Thank you, Rangadhar.
Thank you, Rangadhar.